Software Engineering Principles with Patrick Escarcega.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host for helping you and your teams move fast and deliver quality and to run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything that the .NET ecosystem has to offer. The podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a full-service software architecture and engineering firm that serves companies using .NET and Azure and other Microsoft technologies. We build mission-critical software systems, rescue troubled projects, always empowering software delivery with a proven approach. I am excited to announce that my latest book is fully released. It's about software leadership. It's called The 5 Pillars, Leadership for Effective Custom Software, and it's available hardback, softback, audio book on audible.com and Kindle. And it's for anyone attempting to make a custom software team highly effective. And so if you want your team to deliver world-class results, this book may be for you. And teams are also doing book studies and discussions around it, and I'm excited about that. And if you, dear listener, would like a complimentary electronic copy of the book, just send me an email, and I'd be happy to get it to you. You can email at jeffrey@clearmeasure.com. And for those of you who are in a lead architect or software executive role, you might want to join our monthly software architect forum. They are highly interactive, deeply technical sessions that I enjoy facilitating. You can sign up for those at clearmeasure.com. And I've also just launched a new lead engineer live stream on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/clearmeasure. So you might want to check that out if you're a senior engineer or a lead engineer on a software team. And I'm excited about the guest today on the show. His name is Patrick Escarcega, and he's the Chief Technology Officer of Meserow Design, a company known for its excellence in developing and maintaining custom software solutions. His background is in software engineering, has been leading software teams for many years, and his technical focus has been on Microsoft development and cloud technologies. So Patrick, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
Thank you so much for having me, Jeffrey. It's a good day. I'm enjoying being here.
Fantastic. And I like to ask our guests who come on just so that the listeners can understand kind of the background and the level of experience that we're listening to kind of go back in a career. You've been running software teams for many years now in different management roles and also now running your own company. But if you were to go back to, when you were writing code yourself as an individual programmer, what was the turning point where you said, you know what? I love software. I love the software world, but it might be awesome to actually lead software teams and kind of shift a little bit into leadership roles. Do you remember what a linchpin, a turning point was?
I remember being at a consulting firm in the late 90s, and we were doing a project, I think, for the state of Wisconsin. And I remember at this point, I was 2 or 3 years in my career, and I remember no one stepping up in the dev meetings to be like, okay, here's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
And at that point, I also started to really, I've always been a voracious reader. And I started to read, the books by Steve McConnell and things like, Peopleware. And to start to have some sort of an awareness of, going from an IC, I'm working on a feature, but how does this work to make the business add value? That's really what we're trying to do, is we're trying to do these things that add value to the business by developing systems that improve their workflows or things like this. And how can we as developers do that efficiently? Because I think too much of the time, those decisions are put to non-technical people because we don't focus on how we, generate requirements, how that feeds into us. And we're often left in a state of what I like to call irrationality, where these people are writing things that they need to make sure the project's complete on time, but there's not a real awareness of how this works with software development, right?
Yeah.
And so I just started to take leadership in various teams, and it continued to grow from there. And I enjoy working with people. I really hope that everyone who works for me is very happy in their lives. And that's really what my goal is.
Awesome. When you were mentioning that dynamic, I started to think just about construction projects. Recently, I've kind of been the customer of a few construction projects and seen how they work. And I was just noticing different parallels where it's the same, because I encountered one foreman who's kind of green, and I recognized that foreman didn't inherently have a good understanding of the materials that were being used on the job site or the techniques that some of the actual builders were using for framing or electrical, or even the structural engineering, like where the load-bearing walls were. And it's kind of the same dynamic. There was this leader who was supposed to be responsible for building this structure, but didn't have an actual understanding of how the practices of that type of building came into play. It was a challenge.
Yeah. And it's funny, like I was at a financial investment firm for a long time. The last 10 years of that, I probably didn't code at all, right? My job was mainly reading code, talking to people, making recommendations. And that's one thing I really liked when I started my own company about 5 years ago, was I got to code again.
Nice.
I love to code. I mean, as our company is growing bigger and bigger, of course, those responsibilities slowly fall by the wayside. But I mean, that's one thing. I love to write software. I love to write it. I love to help others write it. I love to help businesses get software delivered to them.
Yeah.
I think it's a very interesting job.
Yeah. Yeah. You're the head chef.
Exactly.
And there's
plus, like I'm in charge of HR, right? I have to, I have to be able to interview people. I have to have a network of connections that I can reach out to if I have job openings who want to work with me. It's not just I'm writing the recipes and running the restaurant, but I am also like having a network out there. So I'm able to reach out and talk to people in the industry.
Yeah, for sure. I think your journey similar to mine, where you might say, okay, I used to spend 8 hours a day, 14 hours a day sometimes, writing code, and it was awesome and it was fun. And now I don't just sit, tap on the keyboard writing code all day long. But the reason that the analogy of a chef came to mind is that if you start out in cooking, you may go hours and just like chopping veggies, prep. But then when you're the head chef, I mean, you are still putting out amazing dishes for people to enjoy, but yet you're not personally chopping all the onions and bell peppers. But that's fine. When you get more senior, you're still delivering custom software. You're just not doing every little task of it anymore.
Yeah. And that's where you have to, rely on a combination of I'm hiring the right resources that believe in the same things I do, and that you have a consistent training program about why we're doing these things and what's the appropriate way of doing it. And, you mentioned a head chef, and I actually liken it more to a food scientist.
Okay.
Because really what we're doing is we're designing systems for people to use to create things. Like how, like a lot of times when you come into a project, you have to get CI/CD set up. You have to get test plans going, and all of these things that if you're doing them, the compliance and regulatory aspects become dramatically simpler if you're just plugging the correct connectors in and when you're releasing, the correct things are happening, as opposed to if that stuff were to happen, disparately and all of a sudden, even getting like regular release reports that you need to file for regulatory reasons can be a nightmare for teams and too much.
Yeah.
And so like as part of our job, we have to think how, and that term pit of success, how can we create a pit of success so our developers are having an easy time developing software and that it's naturally doing all of the things we need it to be doing. A good example is WCAG 2.1, right? Everyone wants it. They want all their sites to be accessible. And there are tools out there that test for it. And most of the time, it's just adding a step to a test plan on every screen saying, did you test it against WCAG 2.1 tool set, in the browser? And so it's upon us as sort of the That's why I think of the food scientists, because we're not just designing sort of the recipes, we're designing the machines that they're using to do the recipes to some extent.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned some practices. Certainly, if you think about the architecture of a software system, you might say, okay, for this particular system, I need some design patterns. But are there certain practices where you now at this point in your career, regardless of the team you're leading, and regardless of the software that you're asked to build, you know that you're going to come to the table with certain practices that you just consider to be basic hygiene for a team at this point?
Oh, 100%. CI/CD. Your code's in a source repo. It's building automatically. It's running unit tests, and it's deploying itself. And then on the code side of that, clean code. I am so far a proponent of writing readable code that, especially as we get up in our positions, a lot of my time isn't spent writing code. It's spent reading it. And so I have a huge preference for readable codes. Can I go in there? Can I read it? Is it properly indented? So constant learning. Really, that's really one thing. In this industry, everything changes, right? 2 years ago, I wasn't using an AI assistant in my integrated development environment. Now it's like I have conversations with it, right? Because it's kind of an idiot sometimes.
Sometimes. Yeah.
But sometimes it's like spookily brilliant,
Yeah.
right? But sometimes it's like, oh, buddy, you didn't even understand what we're doing here.
Right.
But it's that desire to keep learning, to keep current in this industry, which is changing every day. And even though I'm in the Microsoft ecosystem, like the C# language is continuing to evolve, right? That standard is continuing to evolve. On the SQL side, the switch from SQL Server over to Azure SQL, that's actually a lot of little things in the background that you have to be aware of when you're managing large performance systems. That those are real differences. This is not a SQL Server running on a machine. This is a different beast. This is a cloud-native Azure SQL Server. How do I tune that? What am I looking for?
Yeah.
And all these things are just things that we constantly have to learn. And so, like, when I'm looking for people, that's what I'm looking for. Because if you're in this industry, it's never going to stop. You're never going to have to. I can't imagine the pace of learning is going to decrease, that we need to keep learning to stay on top. And so, learning, writing, and sort of like I sort of lump all of that code into like what you call a software crafts person, right? That's sort of the movement that I've been involved in, is the software craft movement about, we really are engineers. I myself am from electrical engineering. That's what I went to college for, was electrical engineering and math. And I definitely think bringing rigor into some of what we do, and it's so weird because we are such a creative profession. I always, when I'm describing it to lay people, I'm like, imagine you're building an engine out of invisible Lego bricks, and you can only see it run. You can't see it when it's built. Like, you can only see the outputs of it.
Yeah.
And sometimes code can be beautiful. Like, sometimes I'll go into people's code and I'll be like, wow, that's what I love.
Yeah.
I love to see that creativity. And then what we're doing is providing a shelf for people to be creative in that manner, in a safe fashion. They're gonna, we're making sure that we're estimating their projects at 40 hours a week. Like, and that we're not assuming some of these other things. And that's our responsibility, is to make those creatives, because really that's what they are, have that space to be creative and not be in an unsafe environment where there are expectations or constraints that will hinder their development.
Yeah. It's interesting that you use the word engineer and also use the word creative, because I hear so many times in the advertising or marketing space or fashion space, creative being that which is in the eye of the beholder. But then when you look at other engineering, like Tesla, well, that creativity built a machine that works. And it's like a different type of creativity, seems like.
Sometimes I go into like, a Git project, or, I'm doing a pull request, and I just think, wow, that's great. That's a very cool way what you did there. Right.
Yeah.
And I almost consider it like and I'm a big art person. I love going to art galleries. I love going to museums and just looking and seeing other people's creativity. And it's the same with code. Sometimes I come in and I'm like, wow, this is such a cool solution to this problem.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think it's important that we give, we as the technology leaders give them the space to create these solutions and not be too proscriptive. And that's why, for us at the food scientist level, it's important that we get these machines right, that they're doing the things they need to be doing without, impinging on their ability to do their job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You mentioned continuous integration and testing. What level do you find yourself being prescriptive? Like how much test coverage and what kinds of steps do you typically insist the teams put into the integration build?
Well, obviously, you should be unit testing your classes. And, I got into almost like a shouting match with Charlie Poole a couple, maybe 5-10 years ago.
The creator of unit.
I know. I think we were at some conference in Portland about when you should write unit tests. Because too often, like when I'm writing a unit, when I'm writing code, I need to fill out at least the fuselage of the aircraft before I can start writing test methods that I don't really even know, like the signatures or what's going on.
Yeah.
As opposed to writing the test and then completely just writing the implementation.
Yeah.
Like I always think sometimes the testing should come like halfway in once you've got, okay, well, I'm not going to be endlessly refactoring these method names at this point. And I know these are the 3 dependencies that affect my, system under test.
Yeah.
And now I can mock or stub those out or do whatever. But I think we should be writing, you should be writing unit tests. And we like to run what are called like integration tests. So like in an API layer, these are things that run against an HTTP version of the API layer itself. I find those valuable. We do have some database level tests that I think it was a framework that we found that we could run unit tests against the database. We do that for some stored procedures and stuff. I have not had great success automating UI testing.
Yeah.
Like that has been
That's
an
hard.
endless bucket of money that just seems as brittle as a piece of, honeycomb candy.
Yeah.
Like the test passed, they failed. The test passed. Well, why did they fail? Oh, some underlying condition that we have no control over. Great.
Yeah.
And they're very, very expensive to develop.
Yeah.
Because you need a whole environment running them. Like it's not just I have a system under test. I'm just testing these little buckets of things I'm testing.
Right.
It's like I need 12 services and 2 databases up and running because they're all interconnected. And sometimes those tests are worthwhile, but maybe I'd just rather hire a QA engineer to perform them manually for 3 months.
Yeah. Just the nature of a full system test, regardless if it went in through the UI or if it was a batch system or even a desktop app. It's having the entire system up and running. And then, it's like, oh, we do payment processing, but PayPal is currently down. And that's why the test failed, for 1 second. And now PayPal's back up.
I know. And you can build your stuff resilient, but I don't, like as a company, I don't have enough resources to devote that energy to testing.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing to tell the developers sometimes because we prefer to do more testing, but at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're writing software that people are going to use.
Yeah.
And that's a balancing act.
One type of full system test that I've found kind of universally beneficial is, and you mentioned automated deployments, and I know you used Octopus Deploy and other automation tools, but after a new version is deployed to an environment, I found it just universally useful to run like one full system test. It's kind of like just a tracer bullet through the system where if any of the dependencies or services are offline, it would fail and I would know it's like, okay, something's wrong.
And I think, that's ultimately what we decided. It's called like the smoke test. So it'll go out and ping like 3 or 4 points and none of them are, write actions, but that bring up like big screens that if they fail, something went wrong. And so we just pick a couple, and as long as they come up, that's the solution, with no errors.
Yeah. what's likely to happen is that a connection between some dependent components or something's wrong there.
Yeah.
Nice.
And thankfully, like, we're not as version helly as we used to be with our deployments. That went away quite a bit once we started using mainly cloud native services.
Yeah. Can I ask you? You mentioned WCAG, WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and there's probably a good number of developers who just kind of maybe they don't pay attention to that because they're not in a certain space where, or maybe all their users are internal employees of the company, where it's just it hasn't been part of the conversation, or they're not required to implement that. Can you just give a synopsis of what that is?
So it is accessibility, and I am definitely affected by it because I'm extremely colorblind.
Okay.
I am what's called red, green, strong, blue, yellow, weak colorblind. So I don't really see red and greens, and sometimes I have a hard telling blues and greens apart.
Mm-hmm.
But what the WCAG 2.1 is, it defines a set of guidelines. One of them is color blindness. There's others, like you have to have alternate captions for all your images, and things that, like, if you have a button within an image, it has to have some sort of descriptor on it. And it's mainly for making websites accessible to, blind readers, to colorblind readers. And the nice thing is, especially around the 2.1 AA standard, there's so much tooling. Like, there's a plugin in Chrome, you can say, show me all my WCAG 2.1 failures against the site I'm currently on, and it'll run that and show that. And there's automated toolings you can put into your build chains that will do that stuff, generate a report, and stash it with your build chains. And so as a developer, like for us, a lot of this gets deferred out to the UI UX designer, because it's up to them to put in the CSS style sheets that use colorblind colors. And then for us, once we have a page in testing, the QA will run it against it and say, hey, you forgot 3 images against these 3 things, right? In the report it generates. And then we submit a clean report when we release on that screen. And so it's not a lot of work in practice once you've done it, but it's just like, setting up that pit of success. Having a step in your test plans to verify, is it WCAG 2.1 compliant? If it is, make sure that the report kicks in with the release.
Yeah.
So we can prove to our clients that this is WCAG 2.1 compliant. But as a developer, it's not a huge amount of work, right? Most of the time, unless a lot of developers are out there, touching their own CSS, and I want to say, don't do that, please. But
yeah. So you mentioned some of the tooling. What are some of the names so that listeners can research? Some of your favorite tools that, if they're not aware, they kind of should be aware of this tool.
So it's going to be called like EqualWeb is one that I've used.
Okay.
Called the EqualWeb Accessibility Checker.
I remember a project a while ago, the Wave toolbar for web accessibility and motion. I'm not sure if that's still kind of maintained these days.
I don't know. And sort of that's the only one I use, because I would have to ask our QAs which one they're using, because they're the ones who do the reports.
Yeah.
But I do the Chrome browser extension. And I know that there are plugins inside both VS Code and Visual Studio that you can do the same thing.
Yeah. Well, I like your thinking about it. It's a set of guidelines so that users that can't see the colors, they see the colors differently, or complete blind users, people who are relying on screen readers. You're building it into the build, so an automatic checker, and there's some tooling that just says, oh, you forgot this. Because we as developers, we're always going to forget some little detail somewhere. It's going to happen.
I know the business asks us to put a button here that does X, and we completely forget about finishing out the button.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. You mentioned AI, and the world is moving so fast around this, and everybody's kind of, lots of startup companies are putting out new tools and AI this and AI that's hard to keep up with. But if you were to, coach a developer, what are you telling your own software engineers about 2 things? One is what AI tools that they should be learning and using, and 2, what type of AI functionality should we maybe even be programming around?
Well, for one, all of our developers should be using an AI coding assistant. We use pretty much GitHub Copilot.
Yeah.
Just so you can understand what it's doing, right? Because these tools are coming, and people say they're going to do my job, and I kind of giggle a little bit, but because there's still a long way between what they're doing, which is not true understanding of the problem, and what we're doing. But I think it's definitely, you should be using these tools on a daily basis so you understand what they're doing in terms of the coding assistance, because it's pretty remarkable, and will open your mind to how you can work with technologies to be, like one of the things we went through as a leader is like, I'm a great individual contributor, but to make bigger software with bigger teams, I have to do something different than just be an excellent individual contributor. And I think once you really start using the coding assistants, you realize, oh, these guys are like just 2 or 3 executive assistants. I could just be having doing my grunt work, right?
Yeah.
And maybe once in a while they'll pipe up with a good idea, but most of the time I just that's not going to work. But and to think of it, and to start thinking about it almost as like having a little bit of a conversation with it while you're doing it. In terms of functionality we're offering to clients, one easy one is to populate a RAG with a help document, and then just submit questions through the AI based on those help documents. AI is remarkable at understanding that and providing clear answers to that with links.
Nice.
So that's an easy way to juice up your help site right there. And then we write at our company, we write a lot of proposals. Many of those proposals are long form essay, which is probably my least favorite thing in the world. And ChatGPT is remarkable. Like, you can feed it a bunch of documents, you can have conversations, and there's this old saying, it's easier to tear a house down than it is to build it. And so often what ChatGPT is doing is dropping you the structure of a house that I was struggling to come out with this basic structure of a paragraph and sentences and all these things. And so it came out, and it didn't say exactly what I wanted, but it understood quite a bit, and I liked what it did here. And so all of a sudden, that 1 hour job of writing these 2 paragraphs turned into like a 10-minute conversation with ChatGPT. And so that's my advice. Isn't like specific technologies, or on the back end, Martin Fowler produced this excellent series on how to actually run LLMs in practice that I definitely recommend everyone look at. It goes into how to populate the RAG, index tuning, error results, stuff like that, and it's really good. But I think in terms of what I tell my developers is just use it. Start to be aware of what it really is, and what it can do, because it's only going to increase, and it's just another aspect of technology that we have to continue to learn. And by all means, if any of the developers find something cool that we should all be using, show us. That's one thing great about running a small company is when I say we need GitHub Copilot, it isn't like I have to file like 90 forms to get access to get GitHub Copilot for a pilot project for 3 months, and then we got to go through contract review. Like, I can just sign us up for licenses, right? So it allows us to be much more nimble in our tooling choices.
Your help desk functionality, your RAG usage, where did you choose to host your LLM? Is it Azure OpenAI, somewhere else?
I'm going a dirty secret here. ChatGPT API.
Okay, using their directly embedding.
Pretty pricey, but it was just for a demo, right?
Yeah. Okay.
And it's pretty straightforward. But no, I would probably go up to the AI labs up in Azure if I were to set this up in real life.
Yeah. Well, ChatGPT has gotten quite commercial, and it's OpenAI that's running it, so I think they're probably signing up quite a few hosting customers.
I'd imagine so. I mean, they're pricey, but it's per token usage, right? That's really what you're paying for is the token counts.
Yeah. I've seen pricing anywhere from 20 cents per 1 million tokens to $2.90 per million tokens. So it's quite a big range. It looks like the dust hadn't settled, but it seems like more and more just specialized hosting companies are popping up that they don't like. They can't host your whole application, but all they want to do is host the large language model endpoint for you to call. So that's kind of interesting.
I don't know. On all that kind of cloud stuff, I always think in my head, if it's not AWS or Azure, should I really be doing this?
Yeah.
Because, one of the things I have to do as in my company is I also have to make sure that all of our pass-through bills work, because we host a lot of sites for various people in our cloud infrastructures, right?
Yeah.
And so pass-through billing for that every month can be challenging if it's something outside of those two platforms that I know how to use their billing infrastructure.
Yeah, that's a fair point. It may be worth, even if they're not the cheapest, it may be worth it because of other benefits.
Yeah, just so that I can, it plugs in there. I have all of my, I don't need to figure out how I get my network engineer access to this if he needs to fix it. It's just,
yep.
And as I get older, I like simpler.
Sure.
Unfortunately.
Fewer things to think about, fewer concepts.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Patrick, thanks so much for coming on the show. This is a fascinating conversation, really fun time for me. Is there anything else that you were thinking the listeners, the developers out there need to hear before we kind of wrap up?
I just hope everyone enjoys the next 5 to 10 years. It's going to be a great, exciting time, and that the world needs software engineers right now. And, enjoy it. I think in 10 years, we're going to look back at where we are now, and it's going to be like looking back at the old VB6 days.
Nice. Old
I'm
software.
excited for that transition.
Yes.
And yeah.
Perfect.
And thank you so much for having me, Jeffrey. This has been actually a really fun, easy conversation.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure indeed. And until next time, dear listener, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.